Maggie Turner hit the elevator button 4 times in a row, as if speed of repetition might override physics, and threw herself between the closing doors sideways, one shoulder first, her badge swinging hard enough to smack her collarbone. "Hold it, hold it. I swear if these doors close on me, I will file a complaint against gravity itself." The doors bounced back open. She stumbled in, breathless, scrubs the color of a hospital sky, a chart tucked under one arm and a granola bar clenched between her teeth, because she had not eaten since 6 that morning, and it was now closing in on 2 in the afternoon. She yanked the bar free and looked up to thank whoever had been kind enough to hit the door open button. The man standing against the back wall of the elevator was not the kind of person she expected to find loitering in a hospital elevator on a Tuesday. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him the way expensive things fit people who never had to think about money, a dark wool that moved with him instead of against him. His hair was black, combed back and precise. A thin white scar interrupted one eyebrow, barely there unless the light caught it right, and it caught it right now under the fluorescent elevator lights. His hands were folded in front of him, still, patient, and there was a stillness to the rest of him too, the kind of stillness that made her think of large predatory animals resting, not sleeping. Beneath the recycled hospital air she caught something warmer, cedar and a trace of leather, out of place in a building that smelled permanently of antiseptic and burnt coffee. "Thank you," she said, adjusting the chart against her hip. "I would have missed my rounds by 10 minutes and Nurse Patterson would have had my head on a spike outside the nurse's station." He said nothing. He looked at her the way a man might look at a puzzle he had not expected to find in an elevator, something faintly curious moving behind otherwise flat dark eyes. "Not much of a talker," she said, mostly to herself, mostly to fill silence, because silence in enclosed metal boxes with strange men made her nervous in the ordinary way silence with strangers made anyone nervous. "That's fine. I talk enough for 2 people most days." Occupational hazard of nursing. You either learn to fill silence or you go insane listening to monitors beep. Still nothing. The elevator ticked upward, floor by floor, the small numbers lighting one after another, and somewhere below them a cart rattled past outside the doors, wheels squeaking against polished linoleum. "You visiting someone?" she asked, because it was a hospital, and most people in elevators here were visiting someone, grieving someone, waiting on someone, and something about his suit told her he was not here for a checkup. "Someone like that," he said, and his voice was low, quieter than she expected from someone that broad through the shoulders, with a faint accent underneath the English that placed him somewhere in the Northeast, somewhere with an ocean and old buildings and older families. The elevator stopped on the 4th floor, her floor, the cardiac unit, and she stepped out with a small wave and did not think much more of it, because nurses on 12-hour shifts do not have room in their heads to dwell on strange, quiet, expensive men in elevators, not when there were vitals to check and medications to chart and a patient in room 412 who kept pulling out his 4 out of pure stubbornness. She did not know, stepping off that elevator, that the man was named Vincent Moretti, that he ran more of the East Coast's quiet business than most federal agents fully understood, and that he had come to this hospital that day to visit a cousin recovering from a shooting that officially did not happen, and that he had not, in longer than he could remember, found himself thinking about a stranger for the length of 4 floors and then several hours after. Maggie forgot about him within the hour. Room 412's patient, a stubborn 71-year-old man named Harold, had pulled his 4 again, and by the time she'd retaped it and lectured him gently about the importance of staying hooked up to the machines that were keeping his heart from doing anything dramatic, the elevator and its silent, sharp-eyed passenger had slipped entirely out of her mind. She was 23, 6 months into her first nursing job after 2 brutal years of school and clinical rotations that had left her running on coffee and stubbornness, and she loved the job in the specific, exhausted way people love things that are hard. She was good at it. She had a gift, one her supervisor had noted more than once, for making frightened patients feel like the room was safer with her in it. A gift that had nothing to do with her size, which people occasionally, stupidly, assumed mattered, and everything to do with the fact that she paid attention, that she remembered which patients wanted their blankets a certain way and which ones needed a joke before a blood draw, and which ones just needed someone to sit for 2 extra minutes and not rush out. The door. She did not think about herself as anyone's love interest. She had made peace mostly with being the funny one, the reliable one, the one men found easy to be friends with and hard to imagine wanting, and she had built a life that did not depend on that changing, a life of overtime shifts and her sister's kids on weekends in a small apartment with too many plants and not enough furniture. She certainly did not expect to see the man from the elevator again 3 days later, standing in the same cardiac unit hallway, speaking in low, clipped tones to Harold's attending physician. "He's family," the physician explained to her when she asked, later, with the particular carefulness doctors use when they are choosing not to elaborate. "Harold is his uncle." "Apparently." "Apparently," Maggie repeated, raising an eyebrow, because the way the doctor said it suggested there was considerably more to that sentence than the sentence itself contained. She found out exactly how much more 3 weeks later, on the night Harold went into cardiac arrest at 11 at night and the entire cardiac floor erupted into the particular controlled chaos of a code blue, carts wheeled, voices raised in clipped medical shorthand, and Maggie at the center of it, doing compressions with her whole weight behind them, counting under her breath, sweat gathering at her hairline, refusing to let her arms shake even as they burned. They got him back. It took 4 minutes that felt like 40, but they got him back, and by the time Harold was stable and wheeled toward the ICU for observation, Maggie was standing in the hallway outside, hands still trembling slightly with adrenaline crash, catching her breath against the wall. Vincent Moretti was standing 3 feet away, having arrived sometime during the chaos, watching the doors of the ICU close behind his uncle's gurney with an expression that had nothing composed about it, something raw and frightened underneath the stillness she'd clocked in the elevator. "He's going to be okay," Maggie said, because it was the sentence she said to families a dozen times a shift. But this time it came out gentler than usual, because something about the fear on this particular man's face did not match the composed stranger from the elevator at all. "You were the one doing compressions," Vincent said. "It was not a question. That's the job." "You didn't stop," he said. "I watched through the window. Your arms were shaking and you didn't stop." "You don't stop," Maggie said simply. "That's not bravery, that's just what the job requires." "He's your uncle?" "The only family I have left who isn't already buried or working for me," Vincent said, and something in the frankness of the answer surprised her, because it was more honest than the situation required, more honest than strangers usually offered each other in hospital hallways at midnight. "Well, working for me is a strange way to describe family," she said carefully, testing the sentence. "It's an honest way," he said, and did not elaborate further, and she did not push, because something in his eyes told her that pushing would close a door that had, against all odds, cracked open slightly. "I'm Maggie," she said instead. "Since we've apparently been riding elevators and doing CPR on your uncle together, it seemed rude not to introduce myself properly." "Vincent," he said. "Vincent Moretti." He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind the dark eyes, an assessment she couldn't fully read. "Thank you for not stopping." "I don't stop for anyone," Maggie said, "least of all a patient with a good pulse and a bad attitude about wires." Something that was almost nearly, a smile moved at the corner of his mouth, gone as quickly as it came, but she saw it, and something about having caused it settled warm and strange in her chest, a feeling she did not have a name for yet and was not in any hurry to name. Vincent Moretti had not smiled at anyone in longer than he could accurately measure. Not the real kind. He smiled at business dinners, the practiced curve of a man performing warmth he did not feel, calibrated exactly to disarm whoever needed disarming that evening. He had not smiled the other kind, the kind that arrived before he decided to allow it, since before his brother Anthony died, for years ago now, in a parking garage in a deal that had gone wrong in ways Vincent still turned over some nights like a stone he could not stop lifting to check what was underneath. He came back to the hospital the next day, ostensibly to check on Harold, who was recovering in the ICU with the particular crankiness of a man who resented being fussed over. He came back the day after that too, and the day after that, and by the end of the week he had stopped pretending even to himself that Harold's recovery was the only reason. "You're here a lot," Maggie observed on the 5th day, finding him in the small family waiting room down the hall from the ICU, a cup of vending machine coffee untouched in front of him, going cold. "He's my uncle. He's stable and cranky and yelling at the nursing staff about the quality of the jello," Maggie said, sitting down across from him without waiting for an invitation, the way she sat with worried families a dozen times a week, except this felt different, and she was aware of it feeling different and she chose to sit anyway. "You don't need to hover in a waiting room drinking coffee you're not drinking." Maybe I like the coffee. That coffee is objectively terrible. I've had it. Everyone on this floor has had it exactly once and never again. This time the almost smile lasted a full second longer before he reined it back in. Maybe I like the company then. Careful, Maggie said, raising an eyebrow. That almost sounded like a compliment. I don't do compliments easily, Vincent admitted, and something in the admission carried weight she recognized. The weight of a man telling her something true about himself without meaning to. Noted, she said. I'll take what I can get. She learned, over the following 2 weeks, in fragments delivered during coffee breaks and hallway conversations and one long night when Harold spiked a fever and both of them sat up with him until 3 in the morning, that Vincent Moretti was not simply a well-dressed man with a sick uncle. She learned it the way you learn something true about a person you've decided to trust before you have all the facts, piece by piece, context filling in around the edges of things he did not say directly. She noticed the 2 men who waited outside whenever he visited, standing near the elevator with the particular stillness of men whose job was watching rather than waiting. She noticed the way hospital security treated him with a deference that had nothing to do with hospital protocol. She noticed, one night, the way his phone lit up with a text he read and then deleted immediately, jaw tightening for exactly the length of one breath before he composed himself back into stillness. She noticed the way his eyes swept a room the moment he entered it, cataloging exits, cataloging strangers, a habit so automatic he seemed unaware he was doing it at all. You're not just a businessman, she said finally, on the 14th night, when Harold was asleep and the ICU hallway was quiet and something about the hour made truth easier to say aloud. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. No, he said. I'm not. Do I want to know what you actually are? Probably not, he said. But I think you're going to ask anyway, because you don't strike me as someone who leaves questions unanswered. Occupational hazard, Maggie said. Nurses ask questions for a living. What are you, Vincent? He looked at her for a long moment, weighing something, and she watched him decide in real time to tell her the truth instead of the version of the truth most people got. My family runs things, he said carefully. Has for 3 generations. Not the kind of things that show up on a business card. The kind of things that show up in a federal file somewhere with my name attached to it in ways nobody can quite prove. So you're telling me you're in the Mafia? I'm telling you I run what's left of the Mafia in this part of the country, yes, Vincent said, and the flatness of the admission, the complete absence of drama in how he said it, was somehow more convincing than any dramatic confession could have been. I told myself I wouldn't tell you that. And then I looked at you and decided I'd rather you knew and walked away than stayed without knowing what you were staying for. Maggie sat with that for a long moment, feeling the shape of it settle into place around everything she'd already half suspected. She should have been afraid. She noted, with some surprise, that she was not exactly, though something in her chest had gone tight and careful. Why are you telling me this? Because I have not stopped thinking about you since an elevator 3 weeks ago, Vincent said. And I am not in the habit of wanting things I have not been honest about. That's a very controlled way of saying something. For a man who just admitted he runs an entire criminal organization. I'm a very controlled man, Vincent said. Except, apparently, around you. Maggie's professional life did not slow down simply because a Mafia boss had started sitting in hospital waiting rooms drinking coffee he did not want. If anything, the 2 weeks that followed were among the busiest of her young career. A stretch that included a multi-car accident that filled half the ER. A norovirus outbreak that took out a third of the nursing staff, and Harold's slow, grudging transfer out of the ICU and into a regular recovery room, complaining the entire way about the quality of the pillows. Through all of it, Vincent kept appearing in the margins of her 12-hour shifts, bringing coffee that was actually good because he'd started bringing his own thermos rather than subjecting either of them to the vending machine's offering, learning the rhythm of her breaks well enough to appear exactly when she had 10 free minutes and not a moment before or after. You have an entire criminal empire to run, she said one evening, finding him waiting by the nurse's station with 2 coffees. And you're spending your Tuesday evening in a hospital hallway. My empire, as you call it, runs fine without me hovering over every decision, Vincent said. That's what an underboss is for. Must be nice. It's not actually, he admitted, handing her one of the coffees. Most nights I don't sleep well. Most days I'm making decisions that end badly for someone regardless of which way I decide. This, he gestured slightly, meaning the hallway, meaning her, meaning the strange domestic pocket of time they'd built out of stolen 10-minute breaks. This is the only part of most weeks that doesn't feel like a transaction. Something in that admission cracked something open in Maggie's chest that she had been carefully keeping shut since the conversation 2 weeks earlier where he'd told her exactly what he was. "I looked you up," she admitted. "After you told me. I couldn't help it. I assumed you would. There's not much. A few court documents where charges got dropped. A name in an article about a shooting nobody could pin on anyone specific. You keep yourself very clean on paper." "I keep myself very careful," Vincent corrected. "Clean isn't a word that applies to my life, Maggie. I want to be honest with you about that, because you deserve honesty more than you deserve comfortable lies." "Then be honest," she said. "Tell me why a man who runs a criminal organization is spending his free time in a hospital hallway falling for a fat nurse with student loans and a studio apartment full of plants she can't keep alive." Vincent set his coffee down on the counter of the nurse's station, slow and deliberate, and looked at her directly in a way that made her chest go tight. "I have met beautiful women my entire adult life," he said. "Women who wanted what my name could buy them, women who performed interest because interest was profitable. I have never once, not in 34 years, met someone who looked at me the way you did in that elevator. Like I was simply a person standing there, not an opportunity and not a threat." His jaw tightened slightly. "You did compressions on my uncle's chest until your arms shook and you did not stop, and in that hallway afterward you told me the truth instead of the comfortable thing, and I have not been able to stop thinking about you since. Your size has never once been part of the equation, Maggie. You should not have to ask that question as though it might be." Maggie felt her eyes burn, unexpectedly, and blinked hard against it. "That's a lot to say in a hospital hallway." "I'm not a man who says things twice," Vincent said. "So I'd rather say it right the first time." There was a night, not long after, when she let herself sit closer to him than she had before, shoulder against his arm on a waiting room bench that was not built for 2 people, and neither of them moved away, and neither of them commented on it, and the not commenting felt like its own kind of admission. He smelled like cedar and something colder underneath, like the outside air clinging to good wool, and she found herself cataloging it the way she cataloged a patient's vitals automatically, and then feeling foolish for noticing it all. "You watch people," she said quietly. "Even here. Even with me." "Old habit," Vincent admitted. "Hard to unlearn." "Do I pass inspection?" Something shifted in his face. Something almost unguarded. "You stopped being an inspection a while ago," he said, and did not explain further, and she did not ask him to. The danger arrived, as danger in Vincent's world always eventually did, on a Thursday night 3 weeks later, in the form of a black sedan that idled too long in the hospital parking garage and 2 men who were not hospital security watching the entrance with the particular patience of men who were waiting for a specific person to leave. Vincent's rival, a man named Salvatore Greco who had spent 2 years trying to carve away at Moretti territory through increasingly aggressive means, had apparently decided that the easiest way to destabilize Vincent Moretti was not through his organization at all, but through the one visible, unguarded soft point he had allowed himself in years. A nurse on the cardiac floor he visited with suspicious regularity. Maggie found out about the surveillance the same way she found out about most things in Vincent's world now, directly and without softening, because Vincent had decided somewhere in the previous month that softening the truth for her was its own kind of disrespect. "There are men watching the hospital," he told her, finding her at the start of her shift. His voice low and controlled in the way it went when he was working hard to keep something else contained underneath it. "Watching for you specifically. Greco knows what you mean to me, and he's decided that's leverage." "Then I should leave," Maggie said immediately. "Take some time off. Stay somewhere else. Whatever keeps this away from the hospital. Away from my patients." "No," Vincent said, sharper than she'd heard him speak before. "That's exactly what he wants. He wants you frightened and removed and me distracted trying to protect you from a distance instead of thinking clearly. I am not interested in giving him that." "Then what do? "We make sure that when he moves, he loses," Vincent said, and something in the flat certainty of it reminded her, not for the first time, exactly what kind of man she had fallen for. The days that followed carried a low hum of tension underneath every ordinary task. Maggie noticed a black car she did not recognize parked across from the hospital's main entrance 2 mornings running. She noticed a man in the cafeteria who ordered coffee and never drank it, who watched the elevator bank instead of his phone. She said nothing to her coworkers, because there was nothing to say that would not sound insane, and she carried the knowledge instead like a stone in her coat pocket, present and heavy and impossible to set down. Vincent's men doubled their presence around her without ever once making it feel like a cage. A car followed hers home at a careful distance. A different pair of eyes watched the hospital's east entrance during her shift changes. She resented it for exactly 1 day before she understood it was not about controlling her movements, it was about making sure she still had movements left to make. The confrontation happened 4 nights later, in the parking garage, at the end of a shift that had run 2 hours long because a patient had coded twice and Maggie had stayed to make sure the family had someone steady beside them through it. She was exhausted, running on fumes, walking to her car in scrubs that had gone through a shift's worth of chaos, when she noticed the black sedan parked 3 spaces from her own car, engine idling, 2 men inside watching her with the specific attention of men who had been waiting for exactly this moment. She did not freeze. She had spent 5 weeks learning, in fragments, what Vincent's world required of the people who moved through it, and some instinct older than fear told her that freezing was the one thing she could not afford. She turned instead toward the elevator bank rather than her car, moving with the unhurried pace of someone who had simply changed her mind about something, and hit the call button, aware of the sedan's doors opening behind her, aware of footsteps closing the distance with the particular quickness of men who had decided patience was no longer required. The garage smelled of exhaust and old concrete, and somewhere above her a fluorescent light buzzed and flickered, and her own pulse was suddenly the loudest sound in the structure. The elevator doors opened just as a hand closed around her arm, and Maggie did the only thing 5 weeks of watching Vincent move through danger had taught her to do. She did not pull away, which would have been expected and countered. She stepped forward hard into the man's space instead, driving her elbow up and back into his throat with her whole weight behind it, the way she'd learned doing compressions, the way that came from knowing exactly how much force a body could take before it stopped fighting back. He staggered, choking, and she was inside the elevator and hitting the door close button before his partner reached them, the doors sliding shut on his shout, and she rode up 2 floors on legs that would not stop shaking, heart slamming, before she got her phone out and called Vincent with a voice she willed steady through sheer force. "There were men in the parking garage," she said, the moment he answered. "I'm fine. I got away. I'm fine. But there were 2 of them, and I don't think they're going to just leave." Vincent's voice, when it came, had gone somewhere colder and more absolute than she had ever heard it. "Stay inside the hospital. Do not go back to your car under any circumstances. I am 4 minutes away." He was there in 3, and the 2 men in the black sedan were gone before hospital security even finished responding to Maggie's report, gone in the particular quiet, efficient way that told her exactly what kind of conversation Vincent's people had likely had with them, a conversation she chose deliberately not to ask further questions about. What followed was not the end of Salvatore Greco's ambitions, but it was the beginning of the end, because Vincent Moretti did not respond to a threat against Maggie with restraint the way he might have responded to a threat against territory or money. He responded the way a man responds when someone has reached for the one thing he has decided he is unwilling to lose, and within a week the balance of power that Greco had spent 2 years trying to shift had collapsed entirely, in ways the newspapers would report only in fragments, in ways Maggie chose not to ask the details of, because some piece required not fully knowing how it had been purchased. She sat with Vincent 3 nights later, in the same hospital waiting room where he'd first admitted what he was, both of them quiet in the particular exhausted way of people who had survived something and were still catching up to the fact of having survived it. The vending machine hummed in the corner. Somewhere down the hall a monitor beeped its steady, ordinary rhythm, and Maggie found the sound oddly comforting, proof that ordinary things kept happening even after everything that had just happened. "I need you to understand something," Vincent said finally. "What happened in that garage? That is the actual shape of my world. Not the coffee and the hallway conversations. That, the men waiting, the danger reaching for you because of me. That is what loving me actually costs. I did compressions on a man's chest until my arms shook, because that's what the job required," Maggie said. I drove my elbow into a stranger's throat in a parking garage because that's what survival required. I'm not naive about costs, Vincent. I've been paying them my whole life in smaller ways. I'm asking you to let me decide, with my eyes open, whether this cost is one I'm willing to keep paying. And if it is, then you stop trying to talk me out of something I've already chosen, Maggie said. I'm not asking you to be less dangerous. I'm asking you to stop deciding for me what I can handle. Vincent looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, an old wall finally, fully giving way. Nobody has ever asked me that before, he said quietly. Most people who learn what I am spend the rest of our time together waiting for permission to leave. I'm not most people, Maggie said. I'm the fat nurse who chased an elevator and got stuck with a mafia boss who can't stop showing up in hospital hallways with coffee. I think we're both a little out of the ordinary category at this point. Something that was fully, unmistakably a smile broke across Vincent Moretti's face then. The real kind, the kind he had not let himself feel in 4 years, and it did reach his eyes this time all the way undeniable in front of anyone who might have been watching. Then stay, he said. Not because I'm asking you to. Because you've already decided you want to. I already decided that a while ago, Maggie admitted. I was just waiting for you to catch up. Harold was discharged the following week, cranky about the food to the very last, and grateful in the quiet, gruff way old men express gratitude, squeezing Maggie's hand at the door and telling her she was welcome at his table any Sunday she wanted a real meal instead of hospital cafeteria food. Vincent walked his uncle out to the car himself, and when he came back inside to find Maggie at the nurse's station finishing her charting for the day, he did not say anything dramatic, did not offer declarations or promises the story did not need. He simply stood beside her, patient, still, the same stillness she'd noticed in an elevator 2 months earlier, except now she understood what lived underneath it, and she leaned slightly into his shoulder without either of them commenting on it, because some things had stopped needing to be said out loud. In the weeks that followed, the hospital hallway became something neither of them had expected it to become. Not a battlefield, not a waiting room, but a kind of home base, the one fixed point in both their lives where nothing was being negotiated and nothing needed defending. Maggie kept working her 12-hour shifts. Vincent kept his empire running, quietly, from a distance, learning to trust the people beneath him to handle what he had once insisted on handling alone. Neither of them pretended the danger was permanently gone, because nothing in Vincent's world was ever permanently anything, but they built their evenings around the parts of life that were steady instead of the parts that were not, and found, to both their surprise, that steady suited them. Same time tomorrow, he said. It was not a question. Bring the good coffee, Maggie said. The vending machine stuff is genuinely a war crime. I'll bring the good coffee, Vincent agreed, and there was nothing performed in it, nothing that belonged to any other story than this one, just a quiet, ordinary promise between two people who had found each other in the strangest possible place and decided, separately and then together, that the cost of staying was one they were both willing to keep paying, for as long as either of them was asked.